Welcome to another episode of the Alignment Podcast. Really excited to have our guest here today, Dan Zimbardi. He serves as the executive pastor of Sandals Church, one of America's largest and fastest growing churches, now serving over 14 communities in California. Dan has over 2 decades of experience working with brands like Google, Nike, and Facebook, and he brings a unique perspective to ministry leadership. He's also an executive coach dedicated to helping entrepreneurs and leaders maximize their impact. Thanks so much for coming on today, Dan. Really excited to hear what you have to say.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me. It's going to be a good time.
To get started, would love to have you introduce yourself, Dan, where you've been and where you're at now and what you're most excited about.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I spent, 20 some odd years as both an entrepreneur and a corporate executive. Man, I got to work with some of the best brands in the world, as you mentioned in the intro. Probably the highlight was my last 2 years in corporate America working with Google. My team and I managed much of their supply chain around the world. And so just got to learn so much, especially about culture. You know, Google always ranks as one of the best companies to work for. And so in my couple of years there, I was really tuned in to how they build a unique and special and winning culture. And so, yeah, many years in supply chain, corporate America, also as an entrepreneur, started 3 companies. 2 of them failed. One of them was a winner. So all 3 of those have been so helpful in my own development as a leader. God called me into ministry 14 years ago. It's just a really an incredible calling story of how I switched at around, 40 years old from being a corporate guy to taking the pay cut of a lifetime to come work in ministry. But certainly one of the best decisions of my life, beyond saying yes to Jesus and yes to marry my wife, coming to serve in the local church has been amazing. And I've been able to be a part of a team who's built just an amazing church. Yeah, over the last 14 years, we went from 1 location to 14, a couple thousand people, to now over the course of a week, we'll reach somewhere between 40, 50,000 people in person and online. And so it's been a great journey. I love to learn, especially about leadership. I love to teach about leadership. My passion today is really coming alongside, especially young leaders. I love working with young leaders. I tell people that the mode I'm in today is I'm at a soccer game. It's a championship game. It's someone that I've been coaching is playing in the game. I'm on the sidelines. I got a drink in one hand and popcorn in the other hand. And in the last few seconds of the championship game, the person that I've been doing some coaching with dribbles the ball down the field, scores the goal. I throw popcorn drink up in the air. I run out onto the field. I grab them, carry them down the field to celebrate them. That's kind of the mode that I'm in right now. Really enjoying and investing in young leaders, watching them flourish and fly. And so that's what I'm most excited about, both as an executive coach, but also as an executive pastor here at Sandals Church.
That's awesome. I'm curious, what themes are the same and what's different between intentionally building that culture and mentoring leaders throughout your time pre ministry and now within working in ministry. I think there's probably some obvious things. One is very faith based, and you aren't necessarily leaning on faith messages for mentoring an executive at Nike. But
Sure.
what themes have stayed the same, and how do you help upcoming leaders stay consistent on what they're trying to do?
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite things to do: compare, contrast ministry in the marketplace. I've been doing this for 14 years now, and just conversations, other podcasts that I've been on, et cetera. I actually really enjoy this little exercise of comparing and contrasting. So lots of similarities. If I'm just talking at a meta level, the ideas of like vision, compelling and inspiring vision, need to show up both in the local church and in the marketplace. In vision, you need a strategy. It's like a framework of how you're going to realize the vision. Again, that applies to both ministry and marketplace. Vision, strategy. Then you need a plan. That's your details. Who's going to do what, when, how much it's, going to cost, et cetera. Then you got to go execute that whole, I call it the excellence paradigm: vision, strategy, planning, execution. I found that it applies whether it's working with a company like Facebook or working in the local church. So much similarity from a sort of operating at a meta level. In the church, I'll say what I found to be the most interesting and I would say probably challenging is just the impact to relationships when you're making difficult decisions. This is a big difference between ministry and the marketplace. And, to go to the most, maybe one of the most extreme things in the marketplace, if you get to a crossroad with an employee and you have to, fire or terminate them, the fallout typically is super minimal from a relational standpoint. But in ministry, it's a whole different deal, and it's because so much of our lives are sort of in one bucket, our personal life, our friendship, our job, our church, it's all mixed in together. And so making hard decisions in ministry is just a whole different ballgame. Needs so much more thought and prayer, consideration, sensitivity. And so, I could talk through that for a long, long time because it's so complex in ministry when you're making hard decisions. It's not just firing someone. It could be, we're going to not do this ministry. Those decisions have all these relational impact and implications. And you have to really think through how you're going to navigate and manage those and really walk people through a change management process when you're making change in ministry that's very focused on relationships. So yeah, I would say that's a big difference when I think about the two. I've been out of the marketplace for 14 years now. I think a lot of things have changed sort of culturally and socially, and we have AI today. We didn't have AI back then. There's been a mobile boom over the last 14 years. I think for me, it's really about continuing to be a learner. I'm 55, and I've been telling our team that I want the next 10 years to be my best years as a leader. And to do that, I need to keep challenging myself to learn, try new things, change, and be a good listener, I would say, is the other thing that's really important. For me to be able to influence young leaders, I have to really listen and pay attention and challenge myself when I disagree with something that's happening even culturally with younger generations, because that allows me to understand younger generations better and then ultimately influence them. And so those are some of the things I think about when I compare and contrast marketplace and ministry.
Yeah, that is fascinating. And I think right, you touched on relationships being huge and being different, deeper at a ministry level. And I think when I think of, is that right? They're different at that level? I think it's more natural, right. They're not right or wrong. But I think that there's a world where we can bring that depth of relationship into the workplace where there is a deeper level of care of like, hey, I don't just care about this person that I'm working with because they do X task for me, but legitimately, like, I care about their well-being. Like, I can't make decisions for them, and I hope they have a happy life, and they're like doing things that will motivate them. And so as you were talking, I was thinking about ways that leaders have helped me. And just at the end, as you were saying, slowing down, um, and asking good questions and listening, I think is just so impactful, because when you do that, you help an individual. You're not just giving them the answers. You're helping them think through and reason through. Okay, why is this something that's useful, or how do you get to the right decision? Whereas if somebody that you're working with and you're mentoring came and asked you a question, you just told them what you thought immediately, it's not going to give them the opportunity to like wrestle with it and to gain the tools, while you can play the guardrails, and they can bounce around to figure out, okay, what is a useful way to think about this? How do we approach this in a way that's sustainable and works?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, you're hitting on something that is, I've been thinking about this a lot, that there's like 5 generations in the workforce today. I think it's the first time we've had actually 5 different generations in the workforce today. And part of why I think a lot of organizations are struggling right now is because they haven't put enough thought and energy and planning around how do we create an environment that's conducive for 5 different generations with 5 different sets of, let's say, values, how we create an environment for them to work together well. And it's just true. If you go from baby boomers to Gen Z, each generation, and I'm speaking broadly, values different things in life, socially, and certainly at work. One of those things actually you hit on, and that's younger generations right now, they want to work at a place where the employer, their boss, cares about their whole well-being, not just their performance, not just how many widgets they can produce on the line in their 8-hour shift. If you go back to, let's say, the boomers, back to, a generation that's older than me, there was no consideration for your whole well-being at work. It was all about, you're gonna do this job, and you're gonna show up at 8 and you're gonna leave at 5, and punch the clock, and be loyal, and don't change jobs. You work at the plant for your 35 years, and then you retire. And there was just not efforts from an organizational perspective. How do we create an environment where people feel cared for, loved, known, seen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas today, generations coming up, Gen Z, the millennial generation cares deeply about these kinds of things and is looking for work environments where they feel those things, they experience those things. And so it's just an interesting observation when it comes to like building a culture that'll differentiate your organization from others in your community, where you're hoping to attract and retain world-class talent amongst other competitors that people that are hiring. I would suggest and encourage people to really think about this. How are we creating an environment that's conducive for 5 generations to thrive in, and especially with a focus on caring for the whole of people? Because I think it's the millennial generation is the biggest generation in the workforce right now. So being thoughtful about that generation, and certainly Gen Z coming up, and what matters to them, I think is really important as an organizational leader.
Yeah, I hear that a ton. And I mean, it's why I'm spending my time on what I'm doing, is because, the way people work and teams, coalesce is different than it ever has been. Um, I think it's easier in my mind to be like, oh, well, how do you do that in ministry? There's a greater purpose and common ground than outside of ministry. When normally, if I show up to my, a workplace, an office building, there's no guarantee that we like share the same, religious beliefs.
Sure.
How do you help in the marketplace, in industry? How do you help people feel more aligned and part of a cohesive culture that cares about them? Probably across that entire spectrum, but more in particularly, Gen Z and millennials, who are really showing, not just with their words, but with their actions, that it's important to them, that they feel a part of and aligned with the company that they're working for.
Yeah, I'll give you a few ideas. The first is really getting clear on what the vision is, and I think maybe vision is starting to get a little bit of like an overused word, but it's getting people excited about the future and the role that they play in that future. And, I think, especially executive leaders, they must be good at crafting and then casting vision. Crafting would be like creating, kind of the narrative, if you will, around vision. And then casting would be your ability to communicate it verbally to individuals and groups of people. So I think that the first thought that I have around your question is really compelling people to something bigger that is exciting and compelling for them, but then helping them to understand how they fit into that, and continuing to message along the way how we're doing and how the team is doing, and creating opportunities to celebrate, especially when you're hitting goals and you're starting to realize that vision. I think that's certainly a key way. I think number 2 is, especially if you're in like some kind of leadership, executive role, maybe in a C level if you're working for a big organization, but just your example, how you model key things like empathy, kindness. You can be a really strong leader, but also be kind and empathetic. Both of those things can exist. And honestly, I think today, the absolute best leader combines both strength and, I'll say, empathy. And so I think, being a leader who cares about people, loves people, that's your reputation in your organization. I think that that's a critical step. And then I'd say the third part, which is tied to that, is just showing people with your actions that you genuinely care for how they're doing. I've got a friend who's an entrepreneur, runs a company. He just learned that someone in his organization is battling something really, really difficult, battling addiction. And, and he's offered to take care of this individual's therapy and rehabilitation and that kind of stuff. And so just I think a willingness to really show with real action that you care for your people in very tangible ways, I say is key as well.
It's awesome. I mean, I think when somebody, I'm trying to remember what the word you said. Was it create and cast a vision?
Yeah, craft and cast. Yeah,
Craft and cast a vision. When you do that, you know, the storytelling is only so powerful if there's not the true authenticity behind it. And I think, you mentioned that kindness and great leadership can coexist. I would, argue if you think of, independent of religious beliefs, who's the greatest leader in the world to have lived and the most longest lasting, that's Jesus Christ. By far has had the biggest impact on, longest last, and that was all based in, you know, kindness and humility and love. And I do think the most powerful leaders show up in that real authentic way of, caring for people and wanting them to win in every part of their life and to be truly happy.
yeah, for
And
sure.
and that, yeah, it's a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you look at a guy like Steve Jobs, and certainly I didn't work for Steve, but the first iteration of Steve at the beginning of Apple, he was known as just an absolute tyrant, jerk, didn't treat people well. He left, he got booted, he came back, and by most accounts, he was a kinder, gentler Steve, still really tough and challenging, etc. But I think he sort of gives you a sense of the evolution of a leader, really trying to understand that you can't win on your own. That's not how we're made to work and live. You gotta win in teams, and to win in teams, you got to be great with people. And if you want to be great with people, you got to be super self-aware. Which perhaps is a conversation for another day. But self-awareness is really key in all of the things that we've been talking about today.
Well, Dan, this has been a really fun conversation to get some of your thoughts and insights on building cultures and building leaders who are going to do it the most useful way, which is legitimately and authentically loving and caring for people. Thanks so much for coming on. This has been awesome.
Yeah, you got it, Jacob. Thanks, man.
If people want to follow along and hear anything else you have to say, where's the best place that they can find you?
DanZimbardi.com is the best place to reach out and follow along and connect as well.
Awesome. It glitched there again for a second, but I
Yeah,
think we're good.
awesome,
Well,
man.
yeah. Thanks so much, Dan, for coming on.
You got it, Jacob. Had a great time, man. We'll talk soon.